The wrench slipped from Kyle's hand and clanged against the metal floor of his repair shop. He'd been working on a busted gravity stabilizer for the past 3 hours, and his back was killing him. Grease stained his worn coveralls, and his knuckles were scraped raw. Just another Tuesday on Harmony 7 station. That's when the hologram appeared. It materialized right in front of his workbench, spinning slowly with that unmistakable blue glow. The Galactic Council seal. Kyle's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came in official holograms with fancy seals. He wiped his hands on a rag and opened the message. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Deportation hearing scheduled. Complainant, Jennifer Webb. Charges, 53 violations of station code. Jennifer. His wife. His soon-to-be ex-wife, apparently. Kyle sat down hard on his stool and read through the charges. Unauthorized repairs on civilian equipment. Operating without proper licensing. Using non-certified tools. Modifying station infrastructure without permits. The list went on, each violation carefully documented with dates, times, and reference codes. She'd been building this case for months. He shouldn't have been surprised. Their marriage had been falling apart since she got promoted to supervisor in station operations 6 months ago. Before that, things had been okay. Not perfect, but okay. They'd met when she was just another engineer working the day shift, and he was the guy with the little repair shop in the industrial sector who could fix anything. Back then, she'd thought his skills were impressive. Now she thought they were dangerous. The final charge made him close his eyes and take a deep breath. Unauthorized modification of station waste reclamation system, subsection 7, without filing forms GC 447, GC 448, or obtaining clearance through proper channels. Potential risk to station population, critical. That one was his fault. Well, they were all his fault technically, but that one he'd known would cause problems. 3 weeks ago, the waste system in Sector 7 had been acting up. Strange smell, weird noises, efficiency dropping. The maintenance crew had filed 17 different reports, and every time, they got the same answer from station administration. They needed to run diagnostics. File environmental impact reports. Get 3 different departments to sign off. Wait for replacement parts from the manufacturer, which would take 8 weeks minimum. Meanwhile, the smell was getting worse, and people were complaining. So Kyle did what he always did. He went down there after his shift, took a look, and figured out the problem. The recycling filters were installed backward. Simple fix. Took him 40 minutes with his own tools, and the system was running better than it had in years. He didn't file the forms. Didn't ask permission. Just fixed it and went home. Jennifer found out 2 days later. He'd never seen her that angry. She'd stood in their small apartment, hands shaking, and told him he could have poisoned the entire station. The regulations existed for a reason. What he'd done was reckless and selfish and exactly the kind of primitive thinking that gave humans a bad reputation in the galactic community. He tried to explain that the system was working fine. Better than fine. Energy consumption was down. Processing speed was up. 0 contamination detected. She wouldn't listen. Said the results didn't matter. He'd broken the rules, and rules were what kept thousands of beings alive in the vacuum of space. That was the night she moved out. Kyle looked around his workshop. It wasn't much. 100 square meters in the cheap part of the station where the ceiling leaked and the air recyclers were loud. But it was his. Tools hung on the walls, organized the way his dad had taught him back in their garage in Texas. Half-finished projects covered every surface. A Krell transport engine that the certified shop said was scrap. A Valthene medical scanner that just needed the right capacitor. A food processor for the noodle shop downstairs that nobody else could figure out. The door chimed. Benny Chen shuffled in, all 4 of his Krell arms carrying parts. Hey, Kyle. Heard about the hearing. That's rough, man. Yeah. Jennifer really filed for deportation. Yep. Benny set the parts down and scratched his chitinous head. Look, I know it's not my business, but you saved my freighter last year. Certified mechanic said I needed a new engine. 20,000 credits. You fixed it for 300 and a case of beer. It just needed a new fuel regulator and some creative rewiring. See, that's the thing. Benny leaned against the workbench. You do that for everybody. You know how many beings on this station you've helped? My cousin's life support chair. The school's air filtration system. That restaurant owner's refrigeration unit. You don't charge much. You don't ask questions. You just fix things. Kyle shrugged. It's what I do. Yeah, well, The council doesn't care about that. They care about rules. Benny's voice dropped. You got a lawyer? Can't afford one. Kyle? I'll represent myself. Tell the truth. Show them the work. Maybe they'll understand. Benny looked doubtful but didn't argue. After he left, Kyle pulled up the hearing details. 3 days from now. Council chamber, main station. Public proceeding. He spent the next hour going through his records. Every repair he'd done in the past 3 years, logged in his personal tablet. Testimonials from clients. Before and after performance data. Photos of equipment he'd saved from the scrap heap. The waste reclamation system was still running perfectly. He pulled the current stats and saved them to his file. His neighbor, old Mrs. Patterson, knocked on the door frame. She was human too, one of the original settlers who'd come to Harmony 30 years ago. Heard the news, kiddo? You hanging in there? Trying to. She walked over and patted his shoulder with a weathered hand. Your granddaddy would be proud of you, you know. Not for the hearing part, but for the work. You've got his gift. Kyle smiled despite everything. His grandfather had taught him everything. How to listen to an engine. How to feel where the stress points were in a structure. How to trust his instincts when the manuals didn't make sense. Thanks, Mrs. Patterson. You go in there and tell them the truth. That's all you can do. After she left, Kyle locked up the shop and headed home to his tiny apartment. It felt empty without Jennifer's things. Her technical manuals were gone from the shelves. Her perfectly organized workspace was bare. He made dinner, ate without tasting it, and tried to sleep. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days until the Galactic Council decided if one human mechanic who broke some rules was worth keeping around, or if Earth needed him back. Kyle stared at the ceiling and wondered if Jennifer would show up in person or just send her documentation. Part of him hoped she wouldn't come. Another part needed to see her face, to understand how they'd gotten here. Tomorrow he'd prepare his defense. Tonight, he just felt tired. Outside his window, Harmony 7 hummed with life. 17 different species living and working together. And somewhere out there, in an apartment he used to share, his wife was probably reviewing her case file, making sure every detail was perfect. She always did like things perfect. The council chamber was bigger than Kyle expected. High ceilings, rows of seats arranged in a semicircle, and at the front, 5 council members sitting behind a curved desk that looked like it cost more than his entire shop. The place smelled like recycled air and power. Kyle walked down the center aisle and tried not to think about how many eyes were watching him. The gallery was packed. He recognized faces from the station. Tommy Rodriguez from the noodle shop. That Krell freighter captain whose ship he'd saved. Dr. Patel from the medical bay. Even some beings he'd never met were there, curious about the human who'd pissed off his own wife badly enough for this. Jennifer sat on the opposite side with the station's legal counsel. She wore her formal uniform, hair pulled back tight, face expressionless. Professional. She'd always been good at compartmentalizing. The head arbiter, a tall insectoid called Vexthar, tapped something that made a sound like a gong. This hearing will come to order. Case number 7743, deportation proceedings against Kyle Webb, human citizen, temporary resident of Harmony 7 Station. Kyle's mouth went dry. This was really happening. Complainant will present charges. Jennifer stood up. No hesitation, no emotion. Just facts. She pulled up holographic displays that floated in the center of the chamber, big enough for everyone to see. The defendant has committed 53 documented violations of station code over a period of 32 months, she began. Her voice was steady, practiced. These violations fall into 4 categories. Unauthorized repairs on civilian equipment without proper licensing. Use of non-certified tools and methods. Modification of personal property without manufacturer authorization. And most critically, unauthorized modification of station infrastructure. The holograms shifted, showing lists and dates and regulation codes. Kyle recognized every incident. The time he'd fixed that school teacher's air purifier. When he'd helped the gym owner retrofit their equipment. The water recycler in the residential wing that kept breaking down. Jennifer walked the council through each violation methodically. She was thorough. He'd give her that. Every repair documented. Every regulation he'd broken cited with the exact code number. She'd built an airtight case. These actions demonstrate a pattern of reckless behavior and disregard for established safety protocols, Jennifer continued. The defendant operates under the assumption that his intuition supersedes thousands of years of galactic engineering standards. Someone in the gallery muttered something. Vexthar's antennae twitched toward the sound, and the room went quiet again. Then Jennifer pulled up the big one. The waste reclamation system. The hologram showed the entire Sector 7 layout, with the system highlighted in red. 3 weeks ago, the defendant accessed a critical station system without authorization, without proper diagnostic equipment, and without filing mandatory safety reviews. According to official modeling, his modification had a 93% probability of causing station-wide contamination. She let that number hang in the air. 93%. Kyle watched the council members exchange glances. The defendant used primitive hand tools, Jennifer said, and now there was an edge to her voice. Just a hint of something personal breaking through the professional mask. He spent 40 minutes making changes to a system that requires a minimum of 8 specialists and 6 weeks of planning according to safety regulations. His actions put 4,700 beings at risk. She sat down. The chamber was dead silent. Vexthar turned to Kyle. Defendant. What is your response to these charges? Kyle stood up. His legs felt shaky, but he made himself walk to the center. No podium, no prepared speech. Just him. I don't deny any of it, he said. I did all those repairs. I used my own tools. I didn't file the forms. Jennifer's lawyer started to smile. This was going exactly how they wanted. But, Kyle continued, can I show you something? Vexthar's antennae twitched. Proceed. Kyle pulled out his beat-up tablet and connected it to the chamber's display system. His hands were sweating, but he managed to get his files loaded. The hologram shifted from Jennifer's pristine documentation to his rough, handwritten logs. This is the waste reclamation system right now, he said. The display showed real-time performance data. Processing time is down 40%. Energy consumption is cut in half. 0 contamination incidents in 6 months. Not 93% probability of disaster. 0 actual problems. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Kyle saw Jennifer's face go pale. And it's not just that system. He pulled up more files. The school's air filtration that I fixed? It's cleaning air 20% better than factory specs. The medical bay scanner I repaired? Dr. Patel says it's more accurate now than when it was new. The freighter engine everyone said was dead? It's been running cargo routes for a year without a single issue. He turned to face the council directly. I also brought testimonials. 317 beings whose equipment I fixed. People who were told their stuff was broken beyond repair. People who couldn't afford the certified shops. People who just needed help. The display cycled through messages. Short ones, long ones, some in languages Kyle couldn't read but had been translated. A Valthene parent whose kid's breathing machine he'd fixed in 20 minutes when the manufacturer said replacement parts would take 6 weeks. An elderly human couple whose climate control he'd saved when they were told they'd have to move to a different apartment. The restaurant owner who would have gone bankrupt waiting for authorized repairs. I broke the rules, Kyle said quietly. I know that. But I helped people. Real people with real problems who couldn't wait 8 weeks and 17 forms to get their lives back to normal. A Kolati in the third row started clapping. Then a Krell joined in. Then more. Within seconds, half the gallery was applauding. Vexthar made that gong sound again, and the noise died down, but Kyle saw something flicker across the arbiter's face. Interest, maybe. Or confusion. The council acknowledges your documentation, Vexthar said. However, regulations exist for safety. How do you explain these improvements? Our engineering standards have been refined over millions of years. You are suggesting your methods are superior? Kyle shook his head. I'm not saying superior. Just different. I learned from my grandfather in his garage back on Earth. He taught me to listen to machines. Feel how they're supposed to work. Trust what my hands tell me. That is not engineering, Jennifer's lawyer said, standing up. That is primitive guesswork. Then why does it work? Kyle shot back. Why is every system I touched running better? Not worse. Not broken. Better. The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have an answer. Vexthar leaned forward. This council requires time to investigate these claims. Your performance data contradicts established theory. We cannot make a determination without verification. How long? Kyle asked. 2 weeks. During this period, you are not to perform any repairs or modifications. Council engineers will examine every system you have accessed. Is this clear? Yes, sir. This hearing is suspended pending investigation. The gong sounded again. People started filing out, talking in hushed voices. Kyle stood there, not sure if he'd helped his case or made it worse. Jennifer walked past without looking at him. But he saw her hands. They were shaking. Tommy caught up with him outside. "Man, you really showed them." "I don't know," Kyle said. "I just told the truth." "That's more than most people do." Kyle walked back to his shop through the crowded corridors of Harmony 7. 2 weeks of waiting. 2 weeks of council engineers poking through everything he'd ever fixed. He unlocked his shop and sat down at his workbench. The gravity stabilizer was still there, half repaired. But he couldn't touch it now. Council orders. For the first time in his life, Kyle's hands had nothing to do but wait. Kyle was on his third cup of coffee when they showed up. 2 Valthene engineers, 1 Kolati scientist, and a human woman in a council badge who looked about as tired as he felt. The past week had been brutal. No work. No repairs. Just sitting in his shop watching the days crawl by. The human woman stepped forward first. "Kyle Webb? I'm Dr. Lisa Park. Council appointed me as liaison for the investigation. These are engineers Thexvol and Krintar, and scientist Mordeth." Kyle stood up, wiping his palms on his jeans. "What do you need from me?" "Right now? Nothing. We're here to examine the waste reclamation system you modified. We'd like you present to answer questions, but don't touch anything." They spent 6 hours in Sector 7. Kyle watched as they ran every test imaginable. Efficiency scans. Stress analysis. Molecular breakdown of the filtration components. They took samples, measured flow rates, and ran simulations that projected system performance 10 years into the future. The Valthene engineer, Thexvol, kept shaking his head and muttering in his own language. Finally, he turned to Kyle. "This should not work." "But it does." "I see that it does. I do not understand how it does." Dr. Park pulled Kyle aside while the others continued their tests. She had dark circles under her eyes and kept rubbing her temples like she had a headache that wouldn't quit. "We've been at this for a week," she said quietly. 26 systems you've modified or repaired. Every single one is running better than specifications. We can measure the improvements. Document them. Verify them. But we cannot explain them." Kyle leaned against the wall. "What do you mean you can't explain them?" "Your atmospheric processor in Residential Wing C. You rewired the molecular separator, right?" "Yeah. It was making a weird noise, and the air quality readings were off. According to thermodynamic principles, what you did should have reduced efficiency by 15%. Instead, it increased efficiency by 22%. The math doesn't work, Kyle. It violates established physical laws." "But the air's cleaner." "Yes. The air is demonstrably cleaner. People are breathing better. But the theory says it shouldn't be possible." She laughed, but it sounded more frustrated than amused. "Do you know how many arguments I've had this week? A Kolati physicist spent 4 hours trying to convince me your repairs break the laws of physics. Except they don't break anything because they work. They just work in ways that our models say they shouldn't." Over the next few days, Kyle watched them expand the investigation. They didn't just look at Harmony 7 anymore. Council teams went to every station, every outpost, every colony where humans worked as mechanics or engineers. The reports started flooding in. A mining station near the outer rim. Human mechanic named Rick had modified their drilling equipment. Production up 30%. Energy consumption down. Council engineers couldn't figure out why. A medical facility on Gateway Station. Human technician called Angela had repaired their imaging equipment using parts from a completely different manufacturer. The machines worked better than the originals. Made no sense according to compatibility standards. A shipping hub in the Kepler sector. Human repair crew had rebuilt a cargo transport that 3 different certified shops had declared beyond salvage. The ship was now hauling freight more efficiently than brand new models. The pattern was everywhere. Humans fixing things in ways that shouldn't work but did. Dr. Park came back to Kyle's shop 2 weeks into the investigation. She looked worse than before. Not just tired. Shaken. "We need to talk," she said. Kyle cleared a space on his workbench, and she sat down heavily. For a minute, she just stared at her tablet, scrolling through data. "I've been a physicist for 20 years, she finally said. "Trained at the Galactic Institute. Top of my class. I thought I understood how the universe worked. Now I'm not so sure." "What did you find?" "It's not what we found. It's what we didn't find. We've analyzed hundreds of human repairs across a dozen stations. Every single one shows the same pattern. Improvements that our theoretical models say shouldn't exist. We keep looking for the trick, the hidden variable, the thing we're missing. But there's nothing. You're just better at this than we are, and nobody knows why. Kyle didn't know what to say to that. So I started looking at brain scans, Dr. Park continued. Human mechanics while they work. And that's when things got really interesting. She pulled up a holographic image of a brain, all lit up in different colors. This is you, last week, when we asked you to examine a broken cooling unit. Watch what happens. The image shifted, colors flowing and changing. Most species, when they approach an engineering problem, they activate the mathematical processing centers. Logic. Sequential analysis. They're running calculations, checking against known parameters. She pulled up another scan. This is a Valthene engineer looking at the same problem. See the difference? Heavy activity in the computational cortex. Light activity in spatial reasoning. They're thinking in numbers and formulae. Then she showed Kyle's scan again. You're not doing that. Look at these areas lighting up. Pattern recognition. Spatial processing. Motor simulation. Your brain is physically modeling the problem. Running simulations based on how things feel, how they should move, how the pieces fit together in space. I don't understand. You're not calculating solutions, Kyle. You're feeling them. Your brain evolved for tool use. Millions of years of human ancestors making things, fixing things, figuring out how physical objects work by touching them and experimenting. That's still in there. She tapped her own head. We think in math. You think in motion and space and physical intuition. Kyle looked at his hands. Scarred knuckles. Grease under the nails. The same hands that used to help his grandfather rebuild engines in that old garage. So I'm not smarter. I'm just different. You're not just different. You're solving problems we can't solve. And it's not just you. It's every human mechanic we've studied. Your species approaches engineering from a completely different angle than the rest of the galaxy. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the station. Do you know how long galactic civilization has been using essentially the same technology? 3,000 years. Minor improvements, sure. Better materials. More efficient power sources. But the fundamental designs haven't changed because we perfected the mathematics millions of years ago. We optimized everything according to theory. And we've been trapped in what's called local optimization. We found the best solutions according to our models and stopped looking. But your models are different. You see possibilities we mathematically eliminated centuries ago. Things that shouldn't work but do because the universe is more complex than our equations. Kyle thought about his grandfather again. The old man used to say that machines talk to you if you listened. Kyle had always thought it was just a metaphor. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a different way of understanding, one that didn't need math. What happens now? Dr. Park turned back to him. Now? Now the council has to decide what to do with this information. Your deportation hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now. But this isn't about you anymore, Kyle. This is about what humanity represents. Some council members want to restrict humans from engineering roles until you're trained in proper methods. They think you're dangerous because you're unpredictable. And the others? The others see an opportunity. A chance to break through 3,000 years of technological stagnation. But either way, your case is going to change everything. After she left, Kyle sat alone in his quiet shop. Outside, he could hear the station humming. Life going on. People working, living, fixing problems with the tools they had. He picked up his grandfather's old wrench. The handle was worn smooth from decades of use. His grandfather's hands. His father's hands. Now his. Jennifer knocked on the door frame. Kyle looked up, surprised. She hadn't spoken to him since the hearing. Can I come in? He nodded. She stepped inside, looking around at the familiar space. I heard about the investigation results. Yeah. Kyle, She paused, struggling with something. I need to tell you something. I didn't file that complaint just because you broke regulations. I know. You do. You filed it because I made you question everything you believe about the right way to do things. That's scarier than rule breaking. Jennifer sat down, and for the first time in months, she looked vulnerable. When we met, I thought you were brilliant. Then I got promoted, And suddenly everyone was talking about proper procedures and galactic standards and how humans needed to prove themselves. Your way of working started feeling like an embarrassment. Like you were making us look primitive. Maybe we are primitive. No. Maybe we're just honest about not knowing everything. She looked at him. The hearing is in 3 days. I can't withdraw the complaint. But I can tell them I was wrong about why I filed it. Will you? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring out what I believe. She left, and Kyle was alone again. 3 days until the council decided his fate. 3 days until humanity's role in the galaxy got redefined. He looked at the broken gravity stabilizer still sitting on his workbench. Council orders said he couldn't fix it. But his hands wanted to. The council chamber was even more packed than before. Kyle spotted news crews from at least 6 different species, their recording equipment pointed at the center stage. Word had spread about the investigation results. This wasn't just a deportation hearing anymore. This was something bigger. Kyle took his seat and tried to ignore the cameras. Jennifer sat in her usual spot, but today she looked different. Uncertain. Her hands kept fidgeting with the data pad, and she wouldn't quite meet anyone's eyes. Arbiter Vexthar called the session to order. The chamber fell silent so fast you could hear the air recyclers humming. This council has completed its investigation into the defendant's modifications and repairs, Vexthar began. Dr. Lisa Park will present findings. Dr. Park stood up. She traded her rumpled lab coat for formal council attire, but she still looked exhausted. The past 3 weeks had clearly taken everything out of her. Members of the council, what we discovered challenges our fundamental understanding of engineering, she said. Her voice was steady, but Kyle could hear the weight behind the words. We examined 247 repairs performed by human mechanics across 12 stations. Every single one shows measurable improvements over factory specifications. Every single one defies our theoretical models. The holographic display lit up with graphs and charts. Performance data. Energy consumption. Failure rates. All of it pointing to the same impossible conclusion. We initially believed these results were anomalies. Measurement errors. But the data is irrefutable. Human mechanics consistently achieve results that galactic engineering theory predicts should be impossible. A Valthene council member leaned forward. You are suggesting our science is wrong? No, sir. Your science is correct within its framework. But I'm suggesting that framework is incomplete. Dr. Park pulled up brain scans. Humans evolved as tool users. Our cognitive architecture is fundamentally different from species who develop technology through pure mathematical theory. We process mechanical problems through spatial reasoning, pattern recognition, and physical simulation rather than computation. She showed side-by-side comparisons. Valthene engineers thinking in equations. Kolati scientists running probability models. Human mechanics visualizing movement and stress and flow. For millions of years, your civilizations refined technology through mathematics. You asked, what do the calculations say? Humans asked, what does this feel like? Both approaches work. But they find different solutions. The chamber erupted in discussion. Council members argued with each other in half a dozen languages. Some looked fascinated. Others looked angry. Vexthar called for order. Dr. Park. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that galactic civilization has been trapped in what we call local optimization. You found the mathematically optimal solutions within your theoretical framework and stopped searching. But mathematics is a map of reality, not reality itself. The universe is more complex than our equations. Humans find solutions in the gaps between the math. A Kolati scientist stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is absurd. Mathematics is universal. The laws of physics do not change because a human feels something different. You're right. The laws don't change. But our understanding of them is limited. Dr. Park pulled up a specific example. Kyle Webb's atmospheric processor. According to thermodynamics, his modification should have reduced efficiency. But he rerouted the molecular separator based on airflow patterns he observed. He didn't calculate the optimal path. He felt where the air wanted to move. And somehow, that intuition led him to a solution that our equations missed. Impossible. Yet measurably true. Dr. Park's voice had an edge now. I've spent 3 weeks trying to disprove this. I wanted to find the flaw. The hidden variable. The trick. But there is no trick. Humans are simply solving engineering problems in ways we never considered because we eliminated those possibilities mathematically before ever testing them physically. The scientist sat down, shaking his head in disbelief. Vexthar turned to Kyle. Defendant Webb. Can you explain your methodology? Kyle stood up. Every eye in the chamber locked onto him. He felt like he was back in school, being asked to explain homework he'd done instinctively. I don't really have a methodology, he said honestly. My grandfather taught me in his garage back in Texas. He'd hand me a broken engine and say listen to it. At first, I thought he meant literally listen. But he meant something else. He meant feel how the pieces fit together. Understand what each part is trying to do. See the system as a whole instead of just components. Kyle walked to the center, next to the holographic displays. When I look at a machine, I'm not running calculations. I'm seeing movement. Energy flowing through parts. Stress building in weak points. Harmonics that need balancing. It's like the machine is telling me what it needs, and I just have to pay attention. That sounds like mysticism, not engineering, someone from the gallery called out. Maybe. But it works. Kyle gestured at the data surrounding him. Every machine I've touched runs better. Not because I'm smarter than your engineers. But because I'm asking different questions. You ask what should this do according to theory. I ask what does this want to do naturally. A human council member spoke up for the first time. Kyle didn't know his name, but he was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and weathered hands. I think I understand what he means. My father was a carpenter. Never went to engineering school. But he could look at a piece of wood and see the chair inside it. See where the grain wanted to flow. Where the stress would concentrate. He didn't calculate beam strength. He just knew. That is not the same as spacecraft engineering, the Kolati scientist protested. Isn't it though? The human council member replied. We've been building things for millions of years. Tools. Shelters. Machines. That knowledge doesn't live in our textbooks. It lives in our hands. In our instincts. We domesticated fire and invented the wheel and built cities without a single equation. That capability didn't disappear when we learned mathematics. We just stopped trusting it. The chamber went quiet. Kyle saw people thinking, reconsidering. Vexthar looked at Jennifer. Complainant Webb. You filed these charges. What is your position now? Jennifer stood slowly. Her hands were still shaking. I filed this complaint because my husband broke regulations. Because he operated without permits and endangered the station. She paused, taking a breath. But I also filed it because he succeeded in ways that terrified me. If Kyle was right, then everything I learned about proper engineering was incomplete. My entire career, my education, my understanding of how things should work. All of it challenged by a man with a high school diploma and his grandfather's tools. She looked directly at Kyle for the first time. I wanted him to fail. I wanted the council to prove he was dangerous. Because if he was dangerous, I could stay comfortable in my worldview. But he's not dangerous. He's just different. And I couldn't handle that. The chamber was dead silent. Jennifer's voice cracked. I was wrong. Not about the regulations. He did break those. But about the reasons. I filed for deportation because I was scared of being wrong. Vexthar studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at the other council members. They conferred in low voices, their translation devices buzzing. Finally, Vexthar spoke. This council requires time to deliberate. The implications of these findings extend far beyond one mechanic. We are adjourned until tomorrow morning. The gong sounded. People filed out, talking excitedly. Kyle stood there, not sure what had just happened. Dr. Park found him outside. That was incredible testimony. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the most revolutionary thing you can do. Kyle walked back to his shop through corridors that felt different somehow. People nodded at him. A Krell merchant called out encouragement. A group of human workers gave him thumbs up. Tomorrow the council would decide. Not just his fate. But something larger. Something about how the galaxy understood intelligence and capability and the many ways to solve problems. Kyle unlocked his shop and sat at his workbench. The gravity stabilizer was still there, still broken, still waiting. He picked up his wrench and got to work. Council orders or not, someone needed that stabilizer fixed. And sitting around waiting had never been his style. Outside, Harmony 7 hummed with the sound of thousands of beings living their lives. And somewhere in that hum, In the vibration of metal and the flow of air and the pulse of energy through conduits, Kyle heard what his grandfather had taught him to hear. The voice of machines, asking to be understood. Kyle barely slept that night. He kept running through every possible outcome in his head. Deportation back to Earth. Restrictions on what humans could do. Maybe they'd let him stay but ban him from touching anything mechanical ever again. That last one felt worse than leaving. By the time morning came, he'd given up on sleep entirely. He showered, put on his cleanest shirt, and headed to the council chamber an hour early. The place was already filling up. More people than yesterday, if that was even possible. He saw faces from all over the station. The owner of that noodle shop. A whole group of human mechanics he'd never met. Even some Valthene engineers who'd probably come to see him get kicked off station. Mrs. Patterson caught his arm as he walked down the aisle. "Whatever happens, kiddo, you did good. Your grandfather would have been proud." Kyle managed a smile. "Thanks." Jennifer was already there, sitting alone. She looked like she hadn't slept either. When their eyes met, she gave him a small nod. Not quite friendly, but not hostile either. Progress, maybe. Arbiter Vexthar entered precisely at 900 hours. The chamber fell silent instantly. Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs. "This council has deliberated extensively," Vexthar began. His voice echoed through the chamber. "The case of Kyle Webb has revealed complexities far beyond a simple deportation hearing. We have consulted with engineers, scientists, legal experts, and economic advisors from 17 species. What we decide today will impact not just one human, but the entire galactic community." Kyle's hands gripped the arms of his chair. Get on with it, he thought. First, regarding the deportation request. This council finds that while the defendant did violate 53 station regulations, these violations resulted in measurable improvements to station safety and efficiency. The waste reclamation system in question operates at superior performance levels. The atmospheric processes function better than manufacturer specifications. Equipment declared beyond repair has been restored to full operation. Vexthar paused, his antennae twitching. More significantly, the investigation revealed that human cognitive approaches to engineering represent a legitimate and valuable methodology. Different from established galactic practices, but not inferior. The deportation request is denied. The chamber exploded. Cheering from half the crowd, angry protests from the other half. Kyle just sat there, not quite believing what he'd heard. He wasn't going home. He could stay. Vexthar called for order, that gong sound cutting through the noise. Furthermore, this council establishes the Human Galactic Engineering Initiative. This program will study human intuitive methods and integrate them with established galactic theory. The goal is not to replace mathematical engineering, but to expand it. To find solutions in the spaces between pure calculation and physical intuition. Dr. Park was grinning in the front row. She'd probably been fighting for this behind the scenes. Kyle Webb is appointed as lead consultant to this initiative, with full station citizenship and a council-funded workshop. Additional human mechanics will be recruited to participate. Formal study will begin within 30 days. Kyle's head was spinning. Lead consultant? Council funding? This was way more than just being allowed to stay. But Vexthar wasn't done. This council also recognizes a larger issue. Our regulations, while created for safety, have become barriers to innovation. For 3,000 years, we have refined existing technology but rarely questioned fundamental approaches. Overregulation has prevented beneficial experimentation. A Valthene council member stood. "Arbiter, are you suggesting we eliminate safety protocols?" "No. I am suggesting we revise them. Create pathways for controlled experimentation. Allow unconventional methods to be tested rather than automatically prohibited. This council has not updated core engineering law in 3 millennia. That changes today." The chamber erupted again. This was huge. Way bigger than Kyle's case. They were talking about changing how the entire galaxy approached technology. Kyle looked around at the crowd. Some people looked excited. Others looked terrified. Change was like that. Scary and promising all at once. Implementation will begin immediately, Vexthar continued once the noise died down. A committee will draft new protocols allowing for experimental modifications under controlled conditions. Multiple species will participate. The era of rigid technological orthodoxy ends today. The gong sounded. This hearing is concluded. People swarmed Kyle immediately. Reporters shouting questions. Mechanics wanting to shake his hand. A Kolati scientist arguing with a Krell engineer about theoretical implications. It was chaos. Dr. Park fought through the crowd. Kyle. We need to talk about the program. There's so much to set up. Workshop space, recruitment, research protocols. Can we do this later? Kyle asked, feeling overwhelmed. I need some air. She laughed. Yeah, of course. Come by my office tomorrow. We'll figure it out. Kyle pushed through to the exit and found a quiet corner in one of the station's observation decks. Through the massive window, he could see stars stretching out forever. Ships coming and going. The endless universe that humans had only just started exploring. Hey. He turned. Jennifer stood a few feet away, hands in her pockets. Hey, he replied. Congratulations. Lead consultant. That's impressive. Yeah. Still processing that. They stood in awkward silence for a minute. So much history between them. So much said and unsaid. I meant what I said in there, Jennifer finally spoke. I was scared. Of being wrong. Of you being right. Of everything I built my career on being incomplete. It's not incomplete. Just different. I know that now. She stepped closer. Kyle, I'm not asking to get back together. That ship sailed. But I'd like to not be enemies. Maybe eventually be friends. Kyle thought about it. The anger he'd felt when she filed those papers. The hurt. But also the relief when it was finally over. They'd been wrong for each other for a long time. Yeah. I'd like that too. She smiled, genuinely this time. Then she left, and Kyle was alone with the stars again. 6 months later, Kyle's new workshop was the busiest place on Harmony 7. 3 times the size of his old shop, with equipment he'd only dreamed about before. But he'd kept his grandfather's old tools too. They hung on the wall in a place of honor. The initiative was growing fast. 20 human mechanics recruited so far, with more coming every week. But it wasn't just humans anymore. A Krell engineer who shaped metal using harmonic frequencies. A Vreen biologist who grew organic circuits. A Threen physicist who manipulated force fields like clay. Beings from across the galaxy who'd been told their methods were wrong, now given space to explore. Kyle taught classes 3 times a week. Mixed groups of species learning not just what he did, but how to trust their own unconventional instincts. How to ask different questions. How to see problems from angles that textbooks never covered. Today's class had 15 students. A young human woman fresh from Earth. 2 Valthene who wanted to understand intuitive methods. A Kolati scientist trying to reconcile math with physical intuition. Others. Okay, Kyle said, gesturing at the broken engine on the workbench. Who can tell me what's wrong with this? The Valthene pulled out diagnostic equipment. The Kolati started running calculations on his tablet. Kyle gently pushed their tools aside. No. Not yet. First, just look at it. Listen to it. If you start it up, how does it sound? Where does the vibration feel wrong? What does your gut tell you before your brain gets involved? They looked confused. He understood. This was hard when you'd been trained to trust numbers over instincts. Here's what my grandfather taught me, Kyle continued. Machines aren't just parts. They're systems. Living systems in their own way. They want to work. They want to flow and move and do their job. Your job isn't to force them into theoretical perfection. It's to help them do what they naturally want to do. He started the engine. It sputtered and coughed, making a grinding noise that set his teeth on edge. Hear that? The rhythm's off. Something's fighting against itself. Not a broken part necessarily. More like parts that aren't cooperating. Now you try diagnostics. Over the next hour, they discovered the problem. Not a single failure, but a cascade of small misalignments that the diagnostic equipment had missed because each individual component tested fine. Only by listening to the whole system could you hear the discord. After class, Kyle stayed late in his workshop. Above his workbench, he'd hung a sign. Simple words on brushed metal, Webb's Repair Shop, where it can't be done is just a suggestion. His tablet buzzed. Message from Dr. Park. The initiative's first major research paper was ready for publication. Human intuitive methods combined with galactic theoretical frameworks. New solutions to old problems. Breakthrough after breakthrough. Kyle smiled and got back to work. He had a transport engine that needed fixing, a student's project to review, and a council meeting tomorrow about expanding the program to other stations. The human who'd almost been deported for breaking rules was now helping rewrite them for everyone. Not through rebellion or force, but by proving that sometimes the best path forward meant trusting what you felt in your hands and heard in your heart. Outside his window, Harmony 7 hummed with life. 17 species working together. Building something new. And somewhere in that hum, Kyle heard what his grandfather had taught him all those years ago in a garage in Texas. The sound of possibilities, waiting to be discovered.